Most organizations with mature, well-resourced security programs genuinely believe their SAP environments are covered from a security standpoint. They have invested in zero trust architecture, in network segmentation, in identity governance. So, where are they wrong? Is there a difference between perception and reality when it comes to securing the SAP environment versus securing the IT systems in an organization?
Absolutely. And this is one of my most interesting experiences over the last couple of years, maybe 10 years even. The fact that you just said this gap between what the decision maker on top level, the C-suite, let's make it very frank. The C-suite has no clue what happens in their SAP environment. Probably they would say, we don't care, because we are not here for the IT, we are here for the business. But unfortunately, SAP is not just IT. The SAP guys on the other side sometimes not even see themselves as part of the IT. IT is for them a service provider to provide the environment for the application. And they are more connected to the business side. But you see, there is the gap between how the business owners look at that and how the system owner, the application owner who run that business see it. And unfortunately, they don't talk the same language. They don't talk what we sometimes call as Japanese. Yeah, so those terms that SAP guys typically use, because is a very specific application, but was obviously successful in the past and you outline the various things that it supports, right? So if you are, as an application, support so many different departments with software, you need to be very flexible. Flexibility comes always with complexity. There is no other way than that. So to manage complexity means you need to be very sophisticated, right? You need to have a lot of processes in the backend, a lot of tech stack in the backend to do so. And the more tech stack you add to the application, naturally, everyone would know that from the IT, you increase the attack vector. When you increase the attack vector, your complexity to protect such an environment just skyrockets. And for that, you need to go back to, from my perspective at least, back to the fundamentals. So to focus on what you can protect, and you can only protect what you know, versus you try to be prepared for the unknown, that kind of attack that can happen. Yes, it can. So what? The question is, how is your preparation? How is your security posture against that?
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series with Dr. Dave Chatterjee. Dr. Chatterjee is the author of the book Cybersecurity Readiness, a holistic and high-performance approach, a Sage publication. He has been studying cybersecurity for over a decade, authored and edited scholarly papers, delivered talks, conducted webinars and workshops, consulted with companies, and served on a cybersecurity SWAT team with chief information security officers. His work on proactive cybersecurity has been featured on USA Today. Dr. Chatterjee has been a tenured professor at the Terry College of Business at the University of Georgia. As a Duke University visiting scholar, Dr. Chatterjee teaches in the cybersecurity programs at the Pratt School of Engineering.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cybersecurity Readiness Podcast Series. I'm your host, Dave Chatterjee. Before we meet today's guest, I'd like to share with you a story to set the stage for our discussion. In August of 2024, Stoli Group USA, the North American arm of the company behind one of the world's most recognized vodka brands, was hit by a ransomware attack. But this was not an attack on the kind of IT system you might typically picture. The attackers went straight for the company's ERP system, Enterprise Resource Planning System, the software platform that ran its financial operations, its reporting, and its day-to-day business processes. And we'll talk more about ERP later. But for now, The short version is they hit the system that kept the business running, and the business stopped running. Within 3 months, this group filed for bankruptcy. Court documents, formal legal filings, cite the attack on the company's SAP system as a direct contributing cause of the company's collapse. A ransomware attack did not just cause disruption, it ended a company. And this is just one of many incidents that highlight the vulnerabilities that organizations are living with when they have large enterprise level systems that are relatively not as secure as they need to be. Without getting into any more details at this time, I'd like to welcome my guest, Mr. Holger Hügel, Chief Technology Officer of SecurityBridge and one of the foremost experts in the world on securing SAP environments. Holger, welcome to the series.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for having me here.
So, as is standard practice on my podcast, I'd love my guests to talk about their professional journey a little bit before we get into the discussion. So please go ahead.
Sure, Dave. Thanks. So basically, I started more than 25, actually 26 years ago in a situation where I had the SAP scenario that you just also described, how important it is for a business. I had it just in front of me. Back then, internet was just at the beginning, but systems were still very vulnerable because of other issues. Back then, hardware was by far not reliable as it is today, and environments were not that much. But it showed me basically how important SAP systems are to run a business. When SAP is not working, basically you need to have a fix within hours, not days, not weeks. And I continued my career to find solutions for these kind of environments. So I started as a consultant for IT service management, system management, software vendors out there. And over a couple of various positions, finally, I came also to understand more about the security aspect of these environments, not just from the availability standpoint. So I learned how vulnerable they are also from a different perspective. And now that the systems were more exposed to the internet, although they were never supposed to be like that. So their basic architecture is created 30, 40 years ago. And with SecurityBridge, finally, I had a company that saw the magnitude of the problem and was about to emerge and create solutions that basically cover all topics that are related to SAP environments across all the various tech stacks that you find when you look at SAP systems.
Very nice. Very nice. So I didn't mean to interrupt you. You had something more to share, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to conclude on that in terms of, for me today, it's very important that what you just shared, the situation, is something that all businesses out there, to a certain extent, they all have here and there an SAP system, if not at the core of their business, and maybe other systems, applications, business applications as well, that they are aware that simple IT security is not enough in today's digital supply chains that we have on this planet.
Very true. And the listeners will know exactly why Holger says this as we go deeper into the discussion today. But before we go any further, I'd like to share with listeners or explain to listeners briefly what SAP and ERP are all about, because they'll be hearing these terminologies time and again. So at a high level, ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. They represent a category of software that generally large organizations use to run core business operations in an integrated fashion. So these are integrated systems supporting functionalities such as payroll, financials, procurement, inventory, supply chain, and more. You can think of it as a central nervous system of a large organization. And so where does SAP fit in? SAP is one of the largest ERP vendors in the world. So we are not just talking about peripheral IT systems here, as Holger alluded to in his introduction. We are talking about the systems that contain an organization's most sensitive financial, personal, and operational data, and that, if disrupted, can stop business operations entirely. Thus, the cybersecurity stakes in these environments are extremely high. I also want to remind listeners that I don't want you to tune off thinking, okay, they're talking about large organizations, large environments, SAP. We don't have SAP, or we don't have Oracle or any such major ERP platform, so this discussion is not relevant to us. That's not true. In fact, you will see us as we get to the end of our discussion and we start pulling things together. We will emphasize how some of the lessons that come away from this discussion focused on SAP, Zero Trust, ERP, really is applicable to all organizations of all sizes, because some of the messages are so fundamental, so intrinsic to cybersecurity governance, that they must be heard and they must be implemented as best as possible. So now let's get back to the discussion again. And I'd like to begin by asking Holger probably the fundamental premise of our discussion today. And that is, most organizations with mature, well-resourced security programs genuinely believe their SAP environments are covered from a security standpoint. They have invested in zero trust architecture, in network segmentation, in identity governance. So where are they wrong? Is there a difference between perception and reality when it comes to securing the SAP environment versus securing the IT systems in an organization?
Absolutely. And this is one of my most interesting and most important experiences over the last couple of years, maybe 10 years even. The fact that you just said this gap between what the decision maker on top level, the C-suite, let's make it very frank, the C-suite has no clue what happens in their SAP environment. Probably they would say, we don't care, because we are not here for the IT, we are here for the business. But unfortunately, SAP is not just IT. The SAP guys on the other side sometimes not even see themselves as part of the IT. IT is for them a service provider to provide the environment for the application. And they are more connected to the business side. But you see, there is the gap between how the business owners look at that and how the system owner, the application owner who run that business see it. And unfortunately, they don't talk the same language. They don't talk what we sometimes call as Japanese. Yeah, so those terms that SAP guys typically use, because SAP is a very specific application, but was obviously successful in the past and you outlined the various things that it supports, right? So if you are, as an application, support so many different departments with software, you need to be very flexible. Flexibility comes always with complexity. There is no other way than that. So to manage complexity means you need to be very sophisticated, right? You need to have a lot of processes in the backend, a lot of tech stack in the backend to do so. And the more tech stack you add to the application, naturally, everyone would know that from the IT, you increase the attack vector. When you increase the attack vector, your complexity to protect such an environment just skyrockets. And for that, you need to go back to, from my perspective at least, back to the fundamentals. So to focus on what you can protect, can only protect what you know, versus you try to be prepared for the unknown, that kind of attack that can happen. Yes, it can. So what? The question is, how is your preparation? How is your security posture against that? And this is something, so part of my role also as a CTO at SecurityBridge is to bring those perspectives together and convert them into software that makes the life of those that are in charge of these systems easier. It's the only thing that we want to make sure there.
Yeah, very true. And when we were having our planning meeting, and you were sharing with me this insight that organizations or the CISO function don't consider security of applications such as SAP to be part of their oversight. It really took me by surprise because I never saw SAP systems as separate from IT systems. In the sense, I get the fact that these are applications, but overall technology management, security governance should provide oversight to such systems. But you obviously are doing it for a living. You are the expert here. So I have to buy into what you said, or I have to believe what you said. And that was really concerning because in all my discussions, in all my research and consulting, I advocate an integrated approach to cybersecurity management, cybersecurity governance. And by integrated approach, I mean organizations have a business strategy, have an organizational strategy, and then they should have a cybersecurity strategy that aligns with the organizational strategy. And that cybersecurity strategy should encompass strategies for securing all systems, including ERP systems. But we will discuss further in terms of what does that specifically mean from the standpoint of SAP security. And Holger obviously is the expert. He will elaborate on that. But before we get there, I wanted to present to listeners the framework that I've been using for the last several years on trying to provide kind of an umbrella, a lens, a holistic lens to cybersecurity governance. And that framework is referred to as the commitment, preparedness, and discipline framework. I introduced it first in my book, Cybersecurity Readiness, a Holistic and High Performance Approach. And since then, I have applied it extensively in my research and advisory work. It's a useful lens for this entire conversation. So let me briefly explain what it is, and then I'll turn it back to Holger, who can talk about its applications in the context of SAP security. So commitment refers to leadership ownership, the explicit, sustained decision by an organization's senior leadership to claim accountability for a risk domain. That's essentially what commitment is all about. A hands-on involvement of the senior leadership, not trying to pass the buck when it comes to security, but taking it hands-on, head-on. Organization can be committed. In other words, without commitment, neither resources nor attention flows to the problem consistently. So therefore, commitment is a very important pillar or dimension of the overall governance framework. And then we have preparedness, which refers to the organizational capability to identify, assess, and respond to threats in any given domain from the standpoint of processes, tools, skills, and visibility. Now, organizations can be committed in principle, but wholly unprepared in practice. So preparedness is a hugely important aspect of governance. You can do all the planning, but if you haven't rehearsed, if you haven't practiced, if you haven't implemented the controls, the talk remains the talk. You are not really going to realize the benefits of all that's available to us by way of best practices. And finally, discipline is the sustained, systematic execution of security practices over time, such as monitoring patch management, access reviews, continuous logging of all the intelligence, the threat intelligence that organizations receive, and many others. But it has to be done on a regular basis, systematically. That also includes real-time audits, real-time evaluation of security threats, and in fact, proactively, and more. So I'll turn it back to Holger. Again, I don't wish to put words in your mouth, but how do you see this framework apply in the context of securing SAP applications in organizations?
I think it's a very good fit because it starts basically with a key issue that you just are the commitment. What we often see in organizations is that there is a lack of commitment. There might be different reasons. I totally understand if the C-suite is focused on the business, but I would like to remind them that probably every company on this planet in the last 10, 15 years invested heavily into digital transformation, into supply chains that create a lot of efficiency benefits. And the trade-off is they opened ERP systems, and in most cases it is SAP, to the entire world. And they simply are not aware about the risk. And unfortunately, this risk is also coming from what I said by that misunderstanding in the language that is used. So if they would go down to the SAP department and say, what are we doing about securing SAP? What is our SAP security posture? They would say, here it is. But what they mean mainly is they focus on managing user authorizations and their privileges, managing maybe vulnerabilities in their custom app, how SAP departments typically look at SAP security. So that's why from a commitment and also an awareness standpoint, I try to use the term SAP cybersecurity to emphasize what we mean by that. And then is the question of, are we prepared to protect an SAP system? And then if the answer is yes, the next question is how? Is this really effective, what we are doing? And can we repeat this over time? And this is basically exactly your model, right? And I see very often that organizations say, well, yes, we do an audit every year. We do penetration testing every year. This is not protection of SAP environments. You just get a spotlight on something. The question is, have you read that report? If you have 2 reports, have you seen an improvement between the first and the second one? And if the answer is no, obviously you have no continuity in what you are doing. You have no process. And unfortunately, I see often organizations, they say, oh, we bought a tool to do security or SAP cybersecurity. They say, you don't have SAP cybersecurity. A tool is not enough. Where are your resources? Where are your people? Where is their knowledge? You need people, and you need the processes to be in place. And sometimes they have an excuse, which is, oh, but it never happened in our environment that we saw a cyber attack. So, oh, interesting. How would you see that? So assuming there is someone in your system, can you explain it to me in plain English? How would you see that? And then they have no answer, because the only answer they can give is, well, we have someone looking at a screen with red lights, which they call security, which is just a simple monitor. And unfortunately, SAP is very good in creating such lists of red lights and critical events. Why? Because, and again, coming back why they were so successful, SAP is not just an application. It is also an environment to develop applications. So you have privileged users that build those applications, so engineers, while they are working on them. On the business level, you also have privileged users working with business data, right? Critical financial data, HR data, and so on. And from a security audit perspective, they all work in the same environment. It looks very similar whether the administrator will do critical things or maybe a malicious actor is doing critical things in an SAP system. That's why for me the question is, where do you see the difference? If you tell me you never had an attack, what would make the difference if there is one day an attack happening? The truth is, unfortunately, they will not see it until the system is down.
Yeah, very true. In fact, there's something I'd like to piggyback on and reiterate. I think you talked about one thing is to have the commitment, but when it comes to preparedness, the how do you ensure that the SAP environment that organizations have in place is really secure? How do you ensure that? In fact, while I was doing my own research, what came through by way of stats was kind of concerning. 67%. In fact, I think this is SecurityBridge's research, which shows that 67% of organizations address SAP security reactively. Actions triggered only by audits, penetration tests, or incidents. There's no routine monitoring, no periodic access review, no process for identifying configuration drift. So when a threat actor arrives, the organization is literally starting from zero. Just like Holger said, that if an application is being built within the SAP platform, often organizations are clueless as to who is really developing their application. Is it a legitimate user or is it a threat actor? So then that begs the question, Holger, that you can only answer here the best. So what are some things that organizations should be doing? Is there maybe obviously this is not enough time to discuss all the details, but what are some recommendations to organizations to enhance their preparedness from SAP security goals?
Yeah. So for me, if we call it the SAP cybersecurity shortlist, 3 things.
Yeah.
Okay. So to make it very, very simple. Number 1, make sure you can patch timely. SAP provides on a monthly basis so-called security notes, which are nothing than security patches to a system. If you are not able to implement the patch in your system within actually a few days, and research today shows that your time window for these kind of exploits is more in hours measured than in days.
True.
So your system is at risk after 1 or 2 days. It is very, very cumbersome to do this, especially if you do this manually. So that's why you need tools to do this. Otherwise, it will not happen fast. The second one, and then again, even SAP provides a so-called SAP security baseline. It's a list of recommendations for all kinds of parameters that have impact on the security posture of your SAP system. Implement those. It's just a list. You need to follow it top down, and then your system is considered to be hardened enough. Experts in this area even have twice as much configurations where they say you need to tweak this. This is then for those that want to improve over time. But these 2 things are very important. And the second one is, as I mentioned, a big problem in SAP is that the critical activities that are supposed to be in the system, right? The good guys and the bad guys are looking the same from a monitoring perspective. So if your monitoring should be good enough to detect a malicious attack, you need to have a way to distinguish between good and bad. And for that, also SAP has a mode called Firefighter, which is basically a separate user to do critical activities, while your user is a normal one staying on basic privileges. We see this, for example, being quite cumbersome to achieve least privilege principle, which is one of the zero trust pillars, simply because it's not very user friendly. And also tracing the user that switch all the time over a day, it's very hard to have a coherent audit trail. So, for example, what we recommend is to have a solution that keeps your user and elevates on a timely basis, on a specific time period, your privileges, the ones that you need to perform a certain activity, and then lowers them down, right? Because least privilege principle is also has a time domain, a time dimension, right? So it means to a certain time, you need to have the privilege that you want to have there. And we adapted that for only one purpose, to be better in the monitoring, because with that, we now know, okay, this is a user, he used a specific process to do critical activities, can distinguish that, we see that process and can say, he authenticated specifically for doing this. So it's an additional layer of security there. And if we see such activities outside of such a privileged session, it's probably the bad guy. So we increase the signal in the monitoring data by that. Yeah, we don't have better rules, but we have a better signal that we can provide. And for me, these are the three fundamental things. Everything else coming next. And the other thing I just want to make the audience aware, maybe a specific in SAP, unfortunately, the audit logs are written in SAP and all monitoring tools need to pull them out. So there is no push mechanism from SAP into those monitoring tools. Everyone who is familiar with this procedure knows that you have a certain time delay between the action happened and you are having the event on your screen. Even if it's 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, typically you have minutes, right, in reality. We all call it real time, but let's be honest, when we talk about real time, we mean seconds, not minutes, regardless of a fixed time frame between action and reaction. So I always want the audience to be aware that with monitoring alone, you won't be able to defend a system. Period. There is no way. AI will not help you because the data set is always delayed. So your reaction is delayed. It's like trying to drive a car while you are drunk. Yeah, it makes no sense, no matter how many assistants you have. Yeah, so it's not doable. And for that, because we realized this and we saw our customers fighting, trying to get false positives out of their monitoring, we said, we need to solve this problem in a different way. So we went back to the original issue, is the fact that administrators and bad actors look the same in your audit logs.
Well, that's very insightful. It's obvious that you are an expert because you can literally speak to each and every functionality and how they should be configured or how they should be used. But let me get back to a term that we have started using in this discussion, and that's the zero trust. So what exactly is zero trust for listeners who are wondering? Zero trust has become one of the most discussed frameworks in enterprise security. And as the name suggests, it essentially represents an approach to security where you trust no one or you trust nothing. In other words, we've heard that very popular phrase, trust but verify. But I think the way I interpret zero trust is you verify before you trust. Now, if you translate that into security principles and practices, we are talking about literally every aspect of security using layman's language. You have to verify whether legitimate users have access to the right system resources. When the role of the user changes, have the privileges been suitably altered? Many a times what I have found, and many others have found, that people move on to different roles and responsibilities and they continue to retain their original privileges. And that is a major, major vulnerability. And then there are many, many more. But I'm keeping it at a high level. But what the zero trust approach does, it conditions the organizational mindset, the leadership mindset, to assume nothing when it comes to security. You have to constantly check every control, whether it's technology enabled, human enabled, process enabled, and check continuously to ensure they are operating optimally. Security is not something that you put it in place and then you can forget about it. It doesn't work that way. I'm all for automated tools. There are some great tools that detect, proactively detect, they thwart, they remediate. And I encourage organizations, users, listeners to consider those tools. However, that is not a substitute for regular human oversight, for regular human intervention. And Holger alluded to that during one of the exchanges we were having a little earlier, that do we have the right people? Do we have appropriately trained people who understand what SAP security is all about and how is it different from securing other aspects of the organization? So therefore, preparedness, going back to my framework of commitment, preparedness, and discipline. Preparedness, as far as securing SAP applications go, it's a pretty broad set of activities that have to be understood and that have to be implemented integrated manner and not in a haphazard, ad hoc, siloed kind of an approach. It has to be very holistic, where you are looking at the entire security picture and taking all the steps necessary to plug those or address those vulnerabilities. And even after you've done that, you have to test continuously to ensure that the security controls are working as they are meant to. I like what Holger said about real-time monitoring, real-time patching, real-time incident management. We're not talking about minutes or hours. We're talking about seconds. Sometimes the actions have to be almost immediate. And that's not going to happen if organizations have not actively rehearsed, have not practiced their incident response mechanisms or their disaster recovery processes. So therefore, it's very important to treat SAP security in a very specialized manner, as well as integrate the security principles, practices with the overall security of the organization. So you are looking at security in totality and not in isolation. I turn it back to you, Holger. Am I making any sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for me, the zero trust is really a good strategy and a foundation that should be really at the bottom of basically the bedrock of every security posture, especially for SAP. And SAP has the problem that I outlined with the monitoring is such a fundamental that only zero trust will help you. Yeah, I can definitely agree with others that say, well, in certain IT infrastructure components, you have real-time monitoring. It's true, but this is not true for SAP system. No matter how good and agentless or whatever you want to do there, it's simply because of the nature of it. The log is in the system, you need to take it from there. And so because you will not be able to be fast enough because of the nature of the system, you need to go back and say, and one of the things you need to assume the breach. That means you need to accept that someone will get into your environment. The question is, have you hardened the environment enough so the damage is limited or controlled? Yeah. To give a very simple picture that I always have in mind when I look at this, I tell it to my customers, think about an SAP system and make a prison out of that, a prison for the cyber attack. They will get in. There are always ways to get in, but they will never get out. Why? You don't know how they got in, but you know exactly how they will try to get out. And these are the doors you can control. So you focus again on what you know. And then it has to do with least privilege principle and all the other aspects. Yeah? And always verify means in SAP system. Whenever someone tries to do critical things, and it's also part of, he wants to get data out of the system, the download function in SAP is one of the most underestimated egress points in SAP. imagine you can have MFA every time this happens, then it's very hard for someone to really damage your system or breach the data out of that. And this is where I try to show them a different approach rather than trying to be even faster and try to win the race against the cyber attacks, which are today AI based. Absolutely, they are. But there is also a fundamental approach for securing those systems, even in the AI era. Yeah. And an AI supported attack will be probably more sophisticated in terms of using vulnerabilities in your system. That's why, unfortunately, the bad news is you need to patch everything. In the past, some customers say, well, we have no time for all the patches. Can we focus on the critical ones? I say, yeah, it's probably okay. It's better than nothing. And you can get away with an 80% approach. But unfortunately, in the AI era, this is not AI. Will find here vulnerability there and make attack chain that you cannot imagine. So you need to patch everything, and you need to make sure that your privileged users are not part of the attack surface. Think about me. I'm exposed. Everyone knows I'm the CTO. Probably I have access to critical data. It's so easy to try to get me compromised. Yeah, even if you send technology against me, 1 out of 1 million actions, I will click on the wrong button, probably.
Correct.
So, and I'm still have a good ratio, right? But it will not save the company. So when we look at our protection, we always say, put me in the position that I'm not part of the attack surface. Take me out of that so I cannot do malicious things without really having secondary approvals. Yeah. And this is part of the zero trust philosophy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well said.
And yeah.
Yeah. So I think you've put it very well. Again, going simply put, the more checks and balances you have in place, the more difficult it is for any individual to keep engaging in different types of malicious activities without getting constant approvals. So you have to build the controls in a manner and a fashion where it becomes very difficult for the perpetrator to even move within the system. Let's assume they have been able to enter the SAP platform. But you have to have those checks and balances, those controls, those notification mechanisms, those threat alert triggers that will immediately send out a siren saying something is wrong, somebody is in who shouldn't be in, and the SWAT team can immediately swing into action and do the needful. But anyhow, this discussion can go on forever, and I would love to have a sequel down the road with Holger. But in the interest of time, with whatever little time is left, I want to accomplish 2 more things before we call it for today. First is speak a little bit about the Medtronic case that we were talking about during our planning meeting. Holger, if you would please. Yes.
Yeah, sure. The Medtronic case is interesting because of one thing. It showed me how we can go from talking about SAP cybersecurity, everyone will confirm it's important, to into an action mode, right? So now we are doing it. And one of the fundamental problems in SAP environments is that the ones who know how to do it, basically how to harden the system, how to patch the system, how to manage the system and administer the system, do not necessarily have a cybersecurity budget. And those who have a cybersecurity budget have no clue about SAP. And Medtronic found a good way to bridge that. Basically, the CISO talked to the SAP guys and say, hey, can we join forces? Can we sponsor you to get the security done? You know it, we have the budget, let's do it together. This was basically the starting point. And they started, other than others that typically look at, so cybersecurity, kind of the first step is typically, we want to have all the data in our CM application. Yeah. I say, great, you can have it, but I can tell you in 1 hour you call me back to turn it off, simply because SAP is so verbose in terms of these things. You better start with system hardening, right? So make sure that you have someone establishing a process to patch and harden the system. You get rid of the vulnerabilities, and then automatically your monitoring will be far more silent, and then you can make value out of that. And this basically happened at Medtronic, right? For a certain period, the CISO basically sponsored the hardening of the system and also the process. After that, they turned it into a process so they can continue on that. And sometimes things happen, like there was suddenly a out of the band vulnerability that hit the market, right? Not in a monthly cadence, just in the midst of the month, right? Suddenly everyone had to patch the system, and they were suddenly, obviously by then, in a good position to do this within a very short time frame. And I asked the responsible person there for the patches. I say, look, many customers have a challenge with the change management process, because when I patch the system, I obviously do a change. They say, look, we balance the risk between the exposure time and the actual impact on the business if this patch harms the business application. The risk is much lower to impact the application, because these fixes are fundamental fixes, very contained and very precise, basically to close a backdoor in the system, what typically is. So the chances to break by just installing it is very minimal. But the chances that we get exposed by waiting until the next change time window is available is simply too high. Yeah. So they said, we install it, we test it for a few hours, look at that, and then it goes down into production. And it sounds, for all the chain, those that say, oh, but we have a proper chain, it sounds weird in first place. But think about it from a risk standpoint, and you figure it out. There's the only way you can do is you need to implement. But you need to be good at that. So that, coming back to the initial thing that we said, you need to have a process for timely patching. If not, if this is surprising you, then you didn't do your homework well. So, go back to the homework.
True, very true. And thanks for sharing the Medtronic case study. Medtronic really exemplifies all three of the CPD pillars, the commitment, preparedness, and discipline pillars. From a commitment standpoint, the leadership claimed ownership before the crisis. From a preparedness standpoint, we are talking about continuous monitoring and automated patch workflows. Those were operational before the event. And from a discipline standpoint, the governance structure could act without friction the day the vulnerability was disclosed. So in other words, they didn't get lucky. They built the infrastructure, they had the processes in place, so they were prepared. And that was essentially that is their success story. That is why it's considered to be a best practice. So anyhow, we are now coming to the last part of our discussion, when we closed it out with some implications for different constituencies. Let me set the ball rolling based on whatever I have learned listening to Holger and from my own experience, that when it comes to our CISO listeners, first, establish visibility. Commission an assessment of your SAP authorization landscape. We're talking about role assignments, separation of duties conflicts, inactive user access, privilege accumulation. Second, establish ownership, hugely critical. Formalize the assignment of accountability for SAP security inside the CISO function. This is a governance decision, not necessarily a headcount decision. Third, assess your patch status. Holger spoke eloquently about patch management. identify disclosed, unpatched SAP vulnerabilities in your environment, and document what compensating controls are in place. So that's kind of the few things that one should do to get going. And I know that Holger has mentioned all of them, but I thought of repeating these towards the end, just from a recency memory standpoint. I turn it back to you, Holger. What advice or what recommendations or what takeaways should board members and executives have from this discussion? Or for that matter, any listener should have from this discussion?
Yeah. So specifically, if you're asking me about, those board members that are quite far away from the technology, right? So no matter what kind of question they would ask, they will not understand the answer. So that's why I would recommend the following. I would encourage them to ask the cybersecurity team or even the SAP team, provide the last and the one before penetration test report, so that they have two reports, the one from this year, the one from the last year. Put this on the side. If you don't see a difference, you don't have SAP cybersecurity in place, because you can have one report which shows all your issues, all your vulnerabilities. But if the second is the same, you didn't change, you didn't improve at all. And I think from their perspective, they want to see that their organization is able to constantly improve the security posture. And this is more important than, asking, what are we doing about SAP cybersecurity? They would just get terms they don't understand, and they would just get excuses.
True, very true. Well, Holger, it's truly been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for me as well.
Yeah, really enjoyed listening to you and learning from you. And I hope listeners have found value in this discussion. And like I said earlier, I hope to pick it up again and have another sequel, because this is an extremely important area. And I hope listeners get the most out of it and do something from what you pick up listening to this discussion.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to a sequel.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The information contained in this podcast is for general guidance only. The discussants assume no responsibility or liability for any errors or omissions in the content of this podcast. The information contained in this podcast is provided on an as-is basis with no guarantee of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness. The opinions and recommendations expressed in this podcast are those of the discussants and not of any organization.